so many. So I've just had a message come up saying recording's in progress, so that threw me a little bit. So it's great to see so many of you here at our forum. It's a lovely sunny day, although I can't really see much sun because I'm ensconced in an office on my own. We've got some really interesting topics for you this morning. We have Helena Morrissey from Thursfields, and we have James Moran from Rutherford Health, talking about COVID and returning to work and how we can cope with a very sensitive topic of employees with cancer in the workplace. So I surely agree those are very important topics that we need to be thinking about. Before I hand over to Helena, I would just like to say thank you to Ben and Hewett Recruitment for allowing us to co-host this webinar with you. And I'm going to hand over to Ben because I think he would like to say a few words of welcome too. So Ben.
Thank you, Dawn. And yes, good morning, everybody. Lots of familiar faces and quite a few new ones, actually, which is always good to see. I thought literally just for a minute, picking up on a couple of things we spoke about in a HR webinar a couple of weeks ago that we did with the Chamber, just pick up on a couple of things that we're still really seeing come to the fore at the moment in the labour market, which is just that mismatch of supply and demand. There are definitely more vacancies out there, but I think many of you in your positions may agree that the candidates aren't necessarily as forthcoming, and it's a really complex picture at the moment. The people on the jobs market aren't necessarily matching up with the skills in demand. And those that are in jobs are actually very reticent about moving. They're very nervous about maybe being caught up if there was a third wave. And so that's really causing a lot of kind of friction in the jobs market. And the other piece is very much that flexible working piece. So it's really interesting that Helena's going to be talking about that shortly, because what we're seeing is candidates that are on the market, they want to know what flexibility is on offer. And we're seeing that businesses who aren't quite sure about what they want to do in that area yet are the ones that maybe are struggling to recruit because they haven't got that clarity around what it is that they're going to do for their current employees or indeed their future employees to attract and retain that talent. So lots of work to be done in that area, I think, actually, as we hopefully continue to come out of COVID. So I'll leave it there. Hopefully have a chance to catch up with a few of you as the day progresses, and we'll go from there. Thanks, Dawn.
Thank you, Ben. So just before I hand over to Helena, I just want to draw your attention to, we do have a chat function, and I'm going to ask Yaz to just put in a test question or a test hello for us to make sure it's working. We have allowed time on the agenda for a Q&A session following Helena and James, but if you prefer to put your questions in the chat as we go along, that will be fine, and then we can just cover those off at the end of each session. So I believe there's a message in the chat. We'll just check that that's all working, and it is. Hello, Yaz. Hello, everyone. So, Helena, if you're happy, I'd like to hand over to you.
Thank you very much, Dawn. That's it's very lovely to be here this morning, and nice to see so many people on the call. And I hope you can all hear me okay. Wave madly if you lose me. Interesting comments that Ben made actually about the job market. I agree. There is a real mismatch at the moment between the people looking for the work and the work that's available. So it'd be interesting to see how things pan out over the next few months on that front. But yeah, I'm here to talk about Back to the Future and just explore some of the legal issues that might arise over the coming months as people do start to try and get back to some sense of normality. We've certainly had quite a lot of queries at Thursfields, and just by way of background, you may well know Thursfields. We have our head office in Worcester. We've also got offices in Solihull, Halesowen, Kidderminster and Birmingham. I'm head of employment at Thursfields and a director, and I joined in the middle of it all last year, actually, at the beginning of August, which was a funny time to change jobs after 14 years in a city centre firm. So yes, it's hit us all in a strange sort of way, hasn't it? These past few months, it's been a very strange time, and I would praise everything that I'm going to say. Is I appreciate that a lot of people, a lot of key workers in particular, have been stoically going into the workplace day in, day out since this all kicked off, and all hail to them. But obviously, a lot of people have also been furloughed and still are, or are working at home still. And it's those people that I'm just going to look at how we might sort of start to integrate them back to the workplace, over the coming months. And I'm keen to say return to the workplace rather than return to work, because I know a lot of us, even if we've been working at home, have still been working quite hard. I offend people when I talk about return to the workplace. So I'm just curious to know what people think the new normal is going to look like. You know, what are your plans? Have you got back to normal? Are you in the process of it? What do you think the future is going to look like for your workplaces? Is it going to be any different to how it is now? Has much changed? You know, there's so many businesses, so many different configurations of how businesses have dealt with the pandemic. I mean, I know some employers want people back full time, rightly or wrongly. Others are quite happy, I think, to allow people to stay working remotely, all the time. Some businesses famously have said they're going to shut a lot of their offices down. And I think probably most people will do a mixture of both, a sort of hybrid, coming into the office, sometimes working at home, sometimes. But, you know, what are the legal implications of this brave new world that we're about to, well, hopefully about to merge back into? I suppose the obvious thing is that, you know, at the end of furlough, which is getting more expensive in July and coming to an end in September, people are sort of rationalising the size of their workforce. And it's hard to do that because things keep changing, you know, and we've seen how quickly things can unravel. But I think, and, you know, I'm not going to talk at length about redundancies because that's a topic on its own for a webinar. But it's really just to say that a lot of my clients are certainly thinking about where they think they're going to be towards the end of furlough and making decisions now. And if you think that you may need to make some changes to your workplace, it's always, or workforce, I should say, it really pays to get your ducks in a row early. And I'm sure I'm speaking to the converted, and I'm sure that all of you who think that you may need to make redundancies are already planning them, if not implementing them. But I do think there will be a big rush of redundancies towards the end of furlough. We thought we saw it at the end of the last furlough, and then furlough didn't end. So I think there is still going to be a bit of an upset. But for those of us, you know, who are lucky enough to be, you know, remain in work, I think, and those that aren't on furlough or will be coming off furlough, we did think June the 21st would be the big return to work day, as in the day that the government's diktat that you should work from home if you can falls away. We obviously, with the Indian variant, that may be pushed back, but it will happen. We will have that time when you know, the work from home diktat is lifted, and there are a number of issues arising out of that, and people sort of coming back to the workplace. And I think the key one actually is that once people are required to come back to work, employers will be faced with a huge flurry of flexible working requests. And it's important to realise that, you know, somebody asking to work at home some or all of the time, where their contract says their place of work is the office, you know, if you're going to change that arrangement, it is a change to terms and conditions. Now, you know, whether you deal with it formally or informally is a matter for you. The employee might say, I'm making a formal flexible working request, in which case, obviously, you deal with it through your policy. But even if you deal with it informally, it's important to write down the new arrangements. If you're dealing with it formally, obviously you've got to deal with it within 3 months, which sounds like a long time, but these things fly by. One advantage of dealing with it formally is that an employee can only make such a request once every 12 months. So if you're adamant you don't really want them to work from home, and you've got a good reason not to, at least if you deal with it through the formal process, they can't keep coming back every couple of months saying, please, can I work at home? I think the problem is, how are you going to turn down the request if working at home has been successful for your business? And I think a lot of employers are facing this conundrum. But I think we need to define successful. It's all very well making do and sort of getting by working at home in the context of what was essentially an emergency and a government order to work at home if you can. And people have done, and some very successfully, but some have got by, but there are elements of the working life that have suffered, either for the employer or the employee, perhaps both. You know, has productivity taken a hit? How have you dealt with supervision of juniors? You know, how do you deal with teamwork? How do you keep up the team morale? We all need human contact, and clever though Zoom is, it's not the same as being in the room with somebody. Equally, I would hate to see a return to presenteeism, where everybody feels they have to be in the office all the time, and you know, the person that's there first and leaves last is you know, great. I'd hate to see a return to that, and I do hope that one thing that's come out of this pandemic is a better, you know, home life or work-life balance for people. But I think, you know, if you're faced with a flexible working request, you've got people asking to work at home. Obviously, you've got your 8 prescribed reasons if you're dealing with it formally. You know, extra cost, damage to, you can't reorganize the work amongst other staff, people can't be recruited, flexible working will affect quality and performance. You know, you can't meet customer demand. These are all reasons you could use, but again, difficult to use if it's actually been very successful to date. And I think where I've got to with it is actually, if you've got no good reason to not allow somebody to work from home, perhaps you should let them work from home. I know another, you know, some companies are actually adopting a firm-wide policy and just saying you may, if you want, work 40% from home or whatever. But again, even if you're adopting a firm-wide policy, it needs to be clearly communicated and the parameters clearly set. But equally, if you're dealing with it on a case-by-case basis, there are a few issues there. What if you could accommodate some people working at home, but not everybody? How do you choose which people get to stay at home and which people don't? It's a bit of a minefield. Certainly do not make judgment calls as to the reason why people are asking to work at home, because the flexible working regime doesn't require you to know why the individual is asking to work at home. And actually, is Joe's desire to spend more time with her elderly mother more worthy than Jim's desire to spend time with his new puppy? You know, if you start going down that rabbit hole of assessing, you know, whose requests are more worthy, A, it's a nightmare for you. B, you could potentially get into discrimination claims and all sorts. So, you know, often I would say first come, first served. It's a bit arbitrary, but it means that you're not making judgment calls. And as I say, even if you don't take it through a formal process, for goodness sake, write down the parameters of any arrangement. I think what worries me is a lot of employees or employers are going to allow the continuing arrangements and implement them essentially by way of inaction and just let them roll on to the extent that they, you know, they work. But as I said, it's a change to terms and conditions. It should be, I mean, it's as a matter of law, it should be documented. And, you know, don't wait for there to be an issue and then try and backtrack and say, well, of course, the arrangement involved a requirement for you to come in to attend weekly team meetings. If you haven't prescribed that at the time, the new arrangement doesn't imply that as a matter of law. That's something that you failed to set out clearly. So, you know, you want to think about things in the arrangement, such as the right to unpick it, because it may not work indefinitely. Are you going to ask them to come into the office regularly for meetings? How are you going to deal with supervision of juniors and make sure that they are adequately supported, but equally visible? Because I know a lot of junior staff are worried that they're not visible working at home, and therefore they're missing out on promotion opportunities. How are you going to develop metrics to measure work properly? Maybe you've already devised them. Maybe you haven't, because as I say, the last 12 months have been a bit of an emergency. You know, are you going to require them to be at a desk at home from 9 to 5, or will you not be so prescriptive? And as long as the job's done, you're not bothered whether they're doing it in the middle of the night. But these are all things that you should be thinking about, and certainly consider implementing a home working policy that covers things like health and safety and insurance and that side of things as well, which is very important, because again, you have some responsibility for the health and safety of your employee in their workplace, wherever that is. So, you know, these are all common sense things, but it's just worth sort of flagging up really today, just briefly. Now, there are obviously the flexible working side of things is one thing, but there are other issues arising out of the return, the Great British Return to the workplace. And as I say, with apologies to those that have been going in every day, you know, since last March, but you know, there are going to be some people who are still going to be nervous about going to the workplace, rightly or wrongly, but they will be nervous and fearful of the COVID risk. And I know certainly that the unions picked up on this quite early. There's the sections 44 and 100 of the Employment Rights Act, which the unions were sort of saying gives the employee the right to stay at home paid if they have a reasonable belief that their health and safety is in imminent and serious danger. And a lot of people were saying, well, COVID is an imminent and serious danger, which I suppose, you know, it is to some extent, but there is a way to give sort of fairly short shrift to this line of argument as an employer. And that is essentially to minimize the risk as far as you can in terms of what you've done in the workplace. And again, I'm sure that most businesses have already implemented measures, and indeed did last summer when we were all sort of partially able to come back to work. But if you've taken those steps to sort of enable people to distance themselves and wipe surfaces down, and you know, you've got a temperature you know, thermometer that people can use, and all these sort of measures that people have been inventively implementing, it's much harder for the employee to say that they have a reasonable belief in the danger to their health. Because if you have taken steps to minimize that risk, it's harder for them to say, actually, I'm in imminent risk of serious danger. It enables you as an employer to say, well, actually, look, we've made the workplace safe as we can. Also, that duty under section 44 and 100 requires the employee to take measures to look after themselves as well. They need to, they have to show that they can't avert that danger. And of course, there are steps they can take too, such as regularly washing their hands, wearing a mask, all these measures. And ultimately, if somebody refuses to come back to the workplace, you've taken your measures, you've clearly communicated them, you've looked at other options. Can this person work at home? You know, are there alternatives? Could they take unpaid holiday until they feel more comfortable? What about taking a sabbatical? But if ultimately you've explored all options and that person refuses to come back to the workplace, then yes, I think you can get to a point where you can dismiss fairly and lawfully. And that's the same whether it's the office that the individual's worried about or their commute. Because, you know, once the government have said you don't need to work at home if you can, the implication is that it is safe to travel around. You know, we can't alleviate risk completely. We take a risk every time we leave the house. And it's just getting comfortable with that level of risk. And I think ultimately, as I say, although you'd need to make sure it was a last resort, you could legitimately dismiss somebody. And just a couple of other issues arising before I close. There's been a lot of commentary about, can you insist on people being vaccinated before allowing them back into the workplace? I think the short answer is probably no, unless there are exceptional circumstances, such as people working in the medical or you know, care setting. And I think if you did dismiss somebody because they refused to be vaccinated, it would potentially be an unfair dismissal and maybe even discriminatory, depending on the reason for their refusal. And actually, you know, if you're taking reasonable measures to reduce the risk as far as possible in the workplace, such as hand sanitizers and distancing and temperature checks, then there's a case to say that actually insisting on a vaccine against somebody's will is disproportionate, rightly or wrongly. But you should certainly encourage people to be vaccinated and facilitate it if you can, such as allowing people paid time off. There's some debate as to whether employers should allow people time off if they get the sore arm and the chills and the symptoms, the side effects. And you could permit them a day or so paid time off, but it'd be very easy to say, oh, I've had a really bad reaction. And, you know, there's potential for people to slightly abuse that. But do facilitate it, obviously. I think more reasonably would be a more reasonable requirement perhaps is to insist on testing. You know, the regular lateral flow tests, which employers can get hold of. And a lot of businesses that I know are insisting on testing. Others are just encouraging. Now, I mean, this is, again, an untested area. We don't have case law on this, but I think certainly insisting on testing could potentially be a reasonable management instruction if you can't alleviate the risk in other ways or minimize it as far as you feel you want to. So, you know, and I think there's an argument that the greater good is, you know, likely to be given precedence over individual inconvenience. Because whilst I can see that there's reasons for not wanting a vaccine, taking a test that takes 5 minutes, there's less of a ground to say, I don't want to do this. So I think it could be seen as a proportionate measure to lower the risk, particularly if it's a workplace that, for example, can't let people distance as effectively as they would like. And the one case we do have is the wearing of face masks. There was a case recently about a lorry driver who refused to wear a mask in his cab. And he was ultimately, this was in his cab when he was making deliveries and obviously leaning out of the lorry and talking to the customer of his employer. And they weren't happy because they insisted on face masks and he refused. He was dismissed and the tribunal held it was a fair dismissal. Now, each case will be on its own facts, but I think this does show a willingness by the tribunal system to, you know, give employers the right to ask employees to basically to inconvenience themselves for the greater good. And hopefully there is a direction of travel there that makes it easier, you know, it comes down on the side of the employer when all they're trying to do is keep people safe. It's only a first instance case, but, you know, watch this space. There's going to be a lot more litigation coming out of this. I think the biggest thing to keep in mind is that although we're returning to normal, it's not the normal that we remember. That there's always going to be, you know, it's going to be different. The challenges that employers face are unprecedented, quite literally. And it may be that mistakes are made, tempers frayed, grievances raised. But I think as employers, you know, as long as you act reasonably and proportionately, and you can justify decisions that you're making in respect of things that you're asking your staff to do and put up with, I think, you know, you shouldn't come a cropper from a legal perspective. I think that's me out of time, but I hope you found some of those points interesting. I'm always happy to have a chat if you want to look me up and talk through any of them in more detail. But thank you very much for your time this morning.
Thank you, Helena. That's such a big topic, isn't it, to cover in such a short space of time. And I think, yeah, there are going to be interesting times ahead, aren't there, in the HR world? We're just wondering what is ahead of us and what challenges and questions we're going to get. So that's been really, really helpful. Thank you. We have got a couple of questions in the chat, but if it's okay, if we can cover all the questions at the end in the summarising session. So if that's okay, Helena, we'll come back to you, a couple of questions at the end. But at this moment, I'd like to actually introduce you to James Moran from Rutherford, who's going to be talking to us about employees with cancer in the workplace and how an employer can actually support those employees. Now, James does have a presentation, so hopefully the technology will work and we can share the screen. But James, yep, over to you.
Yeah, thank you very much, Dawn, and good morning. It's really great to see all of you here. And I was actually just saying to Dawn and a couple of the other guys before this, I handle all of our chamber relationships nationwide for the company, and nowhere else do I see this level of support and attention to detail paid to HR. I think it's such an important role, certainly in the last year, where there's been such a focus on being able to support employees. And how do you pay that same attention to detail that you get in the workplace when people are working from home? You know, do you upgrade their benefits package? What level of support can you offer? So it's certainly great to be speaking to some of you today. My name isn't on screen, but my name is James Moran. And as you can see, I work for Rutherford Health PLC. Just to give you a bit of an introduction to the company, we're a nationwide cancer treatment company. We specialize in cancer care. It's all we know, do, and it's what we love, because at the end of the day, we're making a difference. And it really is a terrible disease that's certainly been heightened. I know our lives have been taken over by a different C word the past year, but I think it's such an important thing. And especially if we can pay more attention to detail and support employees with cancer in the workplace and offer some sort of assurances it's certainly very important for us and employers alike. So in terms of Rutherford Health, what we do, I guess if you were to take the lifetime of a cancer patient, our visions and goals are to make ourselves more apparent for a longer part of that timeline. So the obvious first step of that was to introduce a network of treatment centres in the UK. We have 4 sites where we can treat patients, which is in South Wales, Thames Valley, in Reading, Northumberland in the northeast, and Liverpool in the northwest as well. And apart from that, we also have 200 other partner hospitals, which we do send patients to. So this is split between Nuffield, Spire, BMI and Circle private hospitals. But I guess one thing we've noticed that we could probably pay a bit more attention to and definitely help employers with is there's certainly a lack of workplace cancer support out there at the moment. You guys will know a lot better than me, being HR managers, HR directors, whatever your job title. Usually the communication when talking about cancer between yourselves and this issue would be between insurance companies and insurance brokers, but they're all financially incentivized. That's what an insurance package is. It's the finance at the front end that they tend to be interested in. And there's actually no communication or support being offered by those companies who are directly treating the patients, those who know what it is that takes to treat a cancer treatment pathway. So that's certainly something that we're looking to change by offering this level of support that we can. And certainly I hope I can give you all some food for thought today. I think despite COVID, if you look at cancer, the impact that's had throughout the pandemic, there's 50,000 undiagnosed cancers in the UK that's been directly caused by the pandemic, and they haven't been found yet. And they're obviously going to be at a higher stage of cancer. People are now having to wait 13 weeks for treatment on the NHS. The NHS is a great service that we should all support, but it's certainly a stress service. And even some of the private hospitals that are covering health on a general level are seeing this amount of waiting time as well. And where time is really of the essence when it comes to cancer, if you take a stage 1 cancer has a 90% survival rate amongst patients. It's fairly simple to treat. This tends to be in melanomas or most early stage cancers. If it's found early and it's treated with fast access of the highest quality, things tend to be okay. I know it's scary, the C word, but if you take a stage 4 cancer, which can very much transform in that 13 weeks, stage 4 cancer has a 10% survival rate. So time is really of the essence, and it's really important that not just anybody, but employees certainly have the assurances that they can get fast access to cancer care. So I have got a presentation that I'm going to share with you. And as Dawn said, let's hope this does work. Technology has let me down many times in the last year. Right. The bar's just covering where I can do my presentation. 2 seconds. There we go. I don't usually like doing a presentation because I like to have a conversation with, there's nothing more I'd love than to come in and have a conversation with each and every one of you and understand the sort of needs and demands and how you like to support your employees. But because there's lots of you on the call, I think this is probably the easiest way to get the information across. I can certainly send this out to you afterwards, and I'm sure the Chamber will be happy to do that. And of course, if there is anything that any of you do find interesting or you'd like to speak to us more about, please do get in touch and we'd be more than happy to support you. So as I mentioned, we run a network of cancer centres in the UK, one in South Wales, one in the northeast, one in Thames Valley, and the other one in Liverpool in the northwest, which has just been built. It's not just cancer treatment, it's cancer treatment of the highest quality. And we're one of the only private networks in the UK that just focuses on cancer. And if you take cancer, health is really important to cover across a general level. So most of you may employ some sort of private medical insurance plan, which is absolutely fantastic. If your employee has a bump, scratch, needs a small operation, they tend to fit the bill, but they're not built to deliver when it comes to cancer. If you take the definition of private medical insurance, what that's actually there to do is give you some sort of general financial support towards each medical condition that an employee could come into contact with. And that's fine because anything else tends to be, if you take the self-pay charge within the £1,000 to £10,000 bracket. When you take a cancer treatment pathway, private cancer treatment can cost anything from £40,000, which is what it averagely costs the NHS per patient. So it still has a high cost on the public basis, £40,000 to £200,000 to treat cancer. Now, if you take a plan that you've bought into generally, they're only really usually built to offer £25,000 of cancer support. So there's still a long way to go, and there's certainly no assurances out there at the moment for employers when it comes to dealing with cancer in the workplace. And it's not just the financial element of it, it's more about offering assurance and peace of mind around the topic, because at the end of the day, if you receive a cancer diagnosis, you don't want to be worrying about financials. You want to be worrying about how quick you're going to get access to cancer treatment and if you're going to be supported, and the emotional and holistic side of things as well. So at our centres, we offer a full range of conventional services for cancer treatment. We do outsource our surgical provision. That's why we have the 200 other hospitals signed up to our plan. But we cover proton beam therapy. We're actually the first to introduce this to the UK, and the NHS have since followed suit. We offer radiotherapy as well. And what proton beam therapy does, if you take radiotherapy, it would be radiotherapy enters the body at one site and exits and puts a beam the whole way through, which does irradiate healthy cells that are around the tumour. Proton beam therapy only enters the body at the site of the tumour. So the healthy cells around that tumour are less affected. It's less evasive, and you take it from a workplace point of view. That means that people can actually have treatments such as proton beam therapy and still go to work each day. So it has a massive effect on the time off work that people are having to have. But it's not always relevant for everybody. So we do offer radiotherapy, systemic SAC treatments, which is systemic anti-cancer therapy, which would be your chemotherapy or immunotherapy pathways. What immunotherapy is, it's another new treatment that the NHS have introduced as well as ourselves. Is it helps the immune system. It gives it a boost to help fight the cancer with its own body, rather than intravenous an invasive drug, which can obviously have massive side effects. You look at sort of hair loss that can come with chemotherapy, some of the burns that you could get with radiotherapy. Sometimes those treatments are necessary, but I think it's really important, certainly as a treatment organisation, but now we're venturing into supporting employers with this. When people are diagnosed with cancer, we need to offer them as much choice as possible, because people are getting narrowed down corridors because they don't have the knowledge. So if we're speaking to you as experts in cancer treatment and support rather than experts in financial insurance and brokering, it means that we can offer those choices, and we have the experts on board to support people when they're diagnosed. We also offer a number of holistic therapies as well, which can be something as small as acupuncture, massage therapies. But I think it's really important because there's a whole emotional element when people are diagnosed with cancer, and we have a full range of diagnostic centres. So even pre to that, we can help plan the best possible pathway for our patients. So this is really what I've come to speak to you about today, because I think it's really important that we can raise full awareness to what cancer is doing in the UK and the impact it's having in the workplace, as well as offering some sort of solutions with the services that we have as a company. So there's 123,000 working age individuals diagnosed with cancer in the UK every year. So if you take that, that's 340 people per day going into work, and they're almost always not sure what level of support they've got. Self-pay isn't really an option for employees of most companies, because the self-pay cost of cancer treatment is out of reach for 95% of the population. And if you've invested into some sort of healthcare plan within your company, there's still no assurances as to if that's going to cover the full bill. Most of the time, it may give you some level of support. With the higher level of companies, they tend to get a decent level of support, but there's definitely no assurances there. And it's all about finances at the end of the day. It's all about a financial contribution rather than access to treatment, rather than access to exactly what people need, want, and most importantly, deserve when they're diagnosed. And even at the height of the COVID-19 pandemic, there was a cancer death rate nationally 25 times higher than that of COVID. So it's still a massive issue, and it's something that's almost been papered over with the cracks the last year, but it's something that's coming out with more diagnoses, 50,000 undiagnosed cancers that we're going to find. And that just means the NHS is going to be stressed even more. There'll be more reliability put on some of the private centres. So ourselves offering just cancer treatment in-house, we have a favourable position that we can support people with direct access to our pathways. And obviously the other thing I talked about as well was the cost that this still has to the NHS. It costs the NHS £40,000 on average per cancer patient. And if you take this on a private pathway, if you were self-paying for this, £40,000 to £200,000 is about the average pathway. So there's many different fantastic treatments that are out there on the UK. There's lots of hospitals. We've got lots of NHS networks. It's not the fact that we don't have enough treatment sites. We don't have enough treatment centres in the UK, enough facilities. But cancer is still our second biggest killer. So the 4 causes for this are the fact that hospital capacity is extremely low at the moment because of COVID. Cancer treatment facilities have been taken over by that to treat COVID and other conditions as well, which means the waiting times for cancer treatment have risen significantly. This is not at the fault of the NHS. No one could help the COVID-19 pandemic coming into place, but it's still not fair on those patients who are waiting for treatment to be put on an even further backlog, because, as I said, time is really of the essence when it comes to cancer. The cost of cancer treatment is obviously out of reach for many. 95% of the population can't afford to self-pay for cancer treatment. This would be in most workplaces. You could probably bet that 99 to 100% of those employees would not be able to fork out the 40 to 200,000 pounds for a cancer treatment pathway. And even then, there's unknown. We've certainly seen cancer pathways go into the realms of 300 to 400,000 pounds if it's over a 4 or 5 year period, which you still have to deal with. This can have a backlash effect on families, employees, and the workplace alike. Private medical insurance is a fantastic thing to have in place for your employees, rightly so. If something small happens, if they need quick access to a private GP appointment, or they need their diagnostics or a small surgical procedure, it's a great luxury to have as part of your benefits package. That's not getting away from the fact that 41% of private medical insurance customers have been let down in the last year due to COVID. They've had their treatment cancelled because a lot of these private hospitals that the insurers use are jumping onto the NHS and trying to relieve that service rather than focusing on their usual patients. So there's such a mix-up in the market at the moment. And that's certainly something that with our hospitals, we've definitely been able to get away from and still offer a full service. And if you take some of the more advanced treatments that I talked about, so proton beam therapy, immunotherapy, where there's significantly less side effects for the cancer, could almost mean that employees could go to work the same day as having treatment because it's less evasive to the healthy cells around the tumour. The access thresholds for these treatments is extremely narrow. It tends to be prioritised on the NHS for your paediatrics or under 21s who need cancer treatment, which is fine, but it still means that there's thousands, hundreds of thousands out there who would directly benefit from these more advanced treatments, but are not getting access to them. If you take a prostate cancer or a breast cancer, for example, proton therapy most times will mean the difference between not having surgical intervention and having the prostate removed or the breast removed for a male and female respectively. Those tend to be the big hitters. With proton beam therapy, the healthy cells obviously not being evased by radiotherapy or surgery, so that not needing to happen, which can have a long-lasting effect on the quality of life following a cancer diagnosis. So it is a big issue, and it's certainly something that we're looking to address, and it's something that I'd be really interested to talk to many of you afterwards as to what it is you've got in place and how we can certainly come in and maybe offer some level of support on a company benefit basis or even as a voluntary benefit, because it's a very flexible package that we offer. What we've introduced is something that does everything and anything when it comes to cancer, and there's nothing out there that can offer this level of transparency for employers and employees alike at the moment. We hold ourselves accountable with a membership plan. When employees are diagnosed, we will give them up to £1 million of cancer treatment privately at our network per year. The difference between this and the rest of the market is if you take any other healthcare plan on the market, you'll go through the terms and conditions, and I can guarantee you, some of you would have read through this and are probably nodding your head right now. If you read through Bupa, Vitality, Aviva, all of their policies, it will list the different treatments and it will say full cover, full cover, full cover. Proton beam therapy is usually considered for 3 conditions, but there's no assurances. The difficulty we have there is how do you define full cover? You're letting those who are paying for this treatment at the back end or having to pay out in terms of an insurer or a broker define what full cover means. And that just means what they want to pay for at that very moment in time, or what they can afford to pay for depending on the claim rate. What we've done with this plan is we hold ourselves accountable to our members that they will be supported, and we hold ourselves accountable with that financial figure, but it is all about access to the more advanced treatments. We'll also cover travel and accommodation when employees are diagnosed to and from our centres. And we even cover the cost of a companion, because I think it's really important that nobody would want to go through cancer treatment alone, and we're able to cover their loved ones to have that support with them. We offer a full range of cancer and health counselling and holistic services, which are done at our centres. So as I mentioned before, this could be massage therapy, health, counselling, something very small, acupuncture at our centres. We'll still cover that, because it's still the emotional side to cancer is really important. We cover a daily cash benefit of £250 per day while an employee or a member is having treatment. And where this bears a lot of relevance is the average rise in living cost following a cancer diagnosis, about £570 per month. It's a massive rise, and that's not to do with paying for treatment or paying for private health cover or anything. That is directly to do with small costs such as childcare, turning the heating up on your home, travel accommodation, taking time off work. So if we can help bridge that financial burden with a cash benefit, it's really important that we can do that as well. And then on this plan, we're also able to cover post-treatment medication costs, because there's still a long-lasting effect after cancer, which could mean time off work, which can mean, you know, reoccurring cancers, health conditions. So if we can offer that same level of support before, during, and after, it's really important for the peace of mind and the well-being and health of our members. So how does this differ to probably what you would have seen already out there and the level of support that's probably out there initially on the market? Well, first of all, our pathway is fully private, which means we provide relief to our NHS. It's an extremely stressed service at the moment, so if we can certainly take some of that burden, it's something that we're very happy to be able to do. And I firmly believe that if our members are buying into or investing in a private health cover package, they should get private health care at the back end. We offer complete transparency to our members about the financial value we account for each employee. It's not a financially incentivized package. It's not about a financial payout. We're just giving access to treatment and services, but we still have to hold ourselves accountable to the value of that. So our members can have the peace of mind at the front end that they will be supported, and we're not going to pull the plug because we're being vague about what it is in terms of support that we're offering. We're offering wider access to the more groundbreaking technology. So proton beam therapy, immunotherapy, I mentioned, it gives cancer patients a choice. It can help people get back to work sooner and get back to some form of normality, which I think is really important. And this is the only cancer specialist plan in the UK. There's nothing out there that focuses on cancer and does everything and anything when it comes to that condition. I think it's really important, you know, you can cover health across a general list of conditions, but when it comes to cancer, it costs so much. It has such a long-lasting effect. It's the C word that everybody has been affected with in some way or another. It deserves its own specialist package, which I think is exactly what we're trying to address here. So that's just a short presentation from me. Obviously happy to take any questions, and I hope that's been helpful and has given you all some food for thought on how you may be able to introduce some sort of cancer support in your workplace. And it's been a pleasure to speak to you all.
Thank you, James. That was really interesting. Some of those statistics are a little bit scary though when you hear them explained that way. So thank you. That was very, very enlightening. We do have one question in the chat. So if I can direct that to you, James, and then come back to you, Helena, afterwards, if that's okay. But the question for you, James, is from Jude. Do you cover individuals who have already been diagnosed?
Yeah, if somebody's been clear of cancer for 10 years, then we certainly can. With the model, it is, we wanted to introduce something for those who've already been diagnosed in a shorter period, but no one would be able to cover it because obviously, you know, there needs to be some element of risk in there. So we can cover anybody as long as they've been clear of that cancer for the last 10 years. One of my clients, actually, it's a company that I cover in Liverpool. It's on our website, More Media. She had Hodgkin's lymphoma in 2004. And she wasn't able to get support for this anywhere else or indeed general health cover it without the price being extremely high. So we're able to cover her and her workforce. And it was really great because she was able to offer this to her employees, knowing what she went through and how much it could potentially help them. So I hope that answers the question.
Thank you. Yes, that was very comprehensive. Thank you. Helena, we have some questions for you, if that's okay, if I can come back to you now from your earlier presentation. Yep. So first of all, we have a couple of questions about insurance for home workers. So the question is, how do you cover insurances with home workers? And then that's from Jude. And then Catherine has said she's interested to know about the insurance side too. So maybe you could take a minute to just explain how that would work to us.
Yeah, I mean, I'm not an insurance expert, but I mean, there's two sides of it. Obviously, all employers will have insurance to cover their employees. And I mean, again, I would always say check policies, but these should cover their employer liabilities and things like, you know, professional indemnity and that sort of cover should apply wherever the employee is based. As I say, do check, but that should be covered. In terms of the employee, I think you need to check your own home insurance to make sure that working at home doesn't invalidate it in some way. I've looked at a couple of policies. Certainly where people are working from home because of the pandemic, it doesn't affect their policy. Just check that it doesn't invalidate your policy once the work at home rule has lapsed. But again, you know, employees should be covered by their employer's liability insurance. But again, just have a think about, do you need additional cover for equipment? If it's company equipment, it'll be covered by the employer's insurance. Have a think, you know, are you more likely to damage things? Do you need accidental cover insurance? Check that you've got, public liability. Most home insurance policies do cover it in case a visitor to your home is injured. So if you did for some reason have a work meeting, you know, you want to make sure that the people are covered. I think the short point is most insurances will cover home working, both from the employer and employee side, but just double check your policy if you've got any doubt about that.
Thank you. Yes, it can get a bit complicated, can't it, insurance?
I'm a lawyer, not an insurance broker.
And we have a question from Emma. She wondered what your thoughts were on recording those who have had the vaccination. Around obviously GDPR issues and discrimination issues, and it says in the chat that Emma's from a US company, and they'll be recording and asking those who have to wear a sticker. So interested in your thoughts on that bit.
I get Emma's concerns about GDPR. I think as an employer, you need to ask yourself, why do I need this data? Because it's personal data, it's sensitive personal data. So if you're going to collect it, you need to have a really good reason to have it, and you need to have safeguards to make sure that it's kept secure, it's not kept for any longer than is needed, that you've done a full risk assessment to check that there's no less intrusive way of obtaining that data and sort of processing it. But I mean, it comes back to, why do you need that data? Unless, as I say, you're in an industry or a sector where actually mandatory vaccination is okay, such as care homes, hospitals. Why would you need that? You don't ask if people have had a flu jab. I think, you can't insist on them having it. You're going to potentially embarrass them by asking them. So, and I certainly don't think you should be asking people to wear a badge, unless they want to, of course. But no, I agree. There's a huge GDPR risk there with that sort of data, and unless you've got a very good reason for it, I would just steer clear of that.
Thank you, Helena. I just see Emma nodding there, so you're obviously aligned. Just to throw something in, it's something we're going to do at the Chamber, because we've had our own discussions around this, and we've just sent out a vaccination policy for consultation to our staff. But what we thought we would do is, rather than actually say to people, have you had the vaccination, and record that, we're just going to do a poll, just asking people to anonymously tell us whether they've had the vaccination or not, because that means we're not holding any personal sensitive data on that individual, but it tells us what proportion of our workforce will have been vaccinated, and that will help us perhaps make decisions further down the line about what types of controls we might put in place. So wondered if that was a good compromise.
That's a very good compromise, as you say, because you're not then holding personal data, but it does help you as an employer to know what your risk profile is of your employees, because if 90% of them haven't got the vaccine, you've got a much higher risk profile than 90% being vaccinated. So I think it's useful information on an anonymized basis. I certainly wouldn't insist on people disclosing their vaccination status, in a way that enables them to be identified. So I think that's a really good idea, and I think that's a very good way of collecting that data without breaking any GDPR rules.
Thank you. We'll press on then in that case. In the chat, we do have just some information from Beth Hudson. think, yes, rather than read it all out, I think if I just direct people to the chat, Beth is actually providing some additional information regarding support that's out there and that can be provided. So thank you for Beth for putting that information on the chat for us. Right, so just wanted to summarise very briefly. Thank you so much to both our speakers, James and Helena. Very, very different topics, but I'm sure everyone will agree they're very, very, very important and very, very worthwhile to have those presentations and that chat this morning. So thank you so much for taking the time to come and talk to us about that. And yes, James, if it's okay, we'll send your presentation out as we normally do after the HR forums to everyone on the attendee list. Right, some chamber news. You can't expect me to let you go without talking a little bit about what we're doing at the chamber. You may or may not be aware that our quarterly economic survey is currently